Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. Got a couple of more sound bites I want to play on this Eric Holder business before we spend a little bit more time on that IRS thing. And again, sort of the issue that I would be interested in having you weigh in on this IRS issue. We look at Lois Lerner now. We know that she went after a candidate in 1996 when she was with the FEC. Saying if you won't run again, we won't pursue this case, even though there was no legal problem there whatsoever, and he was eventually exonerated. And now we see the IRS going after Tea Party groups, and just want to kind of get your reaction to the IRS. Does this just confirm what you've always suspected about the IRS? And maybe what do you think we ought to do about it? What do you think we ought to do about the IRS? What's the solution here? How should things change in order to correct what we've got going on with the IRS? I want you to drop down, if we can, Rob, drop down to clip number 16. It's the Lisa Myers clip. Let's drop down to that one because she is talking here about the IRS. And now Lisa Myers, remember, she is an investigative reporter for NBC. So this is somebody that's in the tank for the Obama administration. So NBC, ABC, CBS, all of them have been cheerleaders for President Obama. They've just been lapdogs for President Obama. They're part of his cheerleading squad. They're part of the ministers of propaganda that are at his disposal to hack and flack for him. And now here's Lisa Myers, and she's beginning to turn on the Obama administration. Let's listen.
I still think the IRS is the bigger scandal because, the IRS goes to the heart of our government. Yeah. And we not only don't know how this started, we know that mid-level managers knew about it for a long time, and we know that for a year, the IRS essentially knowingly lied to Congress, and no one came forward. There was no whistleblower. Unlike the State Department on Benghazi, when 3 people risked their careers because they thought the truth was not coming out. Here, in the IRS, there's nothing but silence.
So Lisa Myers saying, look, IRS lied here for over a year. The number to call, by the way, 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. And what I want to hear from you is what do you think we ought to do about this IRS problem? What would you like to see as a tax-paying citizen? What would you like to see done in response to this IRS scandal? It might be what you want done to the people that perpetrated this thing. It might be what you want done with our entire tax structure. Do you want to see a fair tax? Do you want to see a flat tax? What direction do you want to go to try to deal with the damage that's being done here? The commissioner of the IRS, 888-589-8840 is the number, 888-589-8840. We've talked before and we played some sound bites. The former IRS Commissioner Douglas Schulman and the Daily Caller has done some poking into White House visitors records, and it's worse than we thought. I sent out a tweet. One of the most retweeted tweets I've sent out indicated that he had visited the White House 118 times, whereas President Bush's IRS commissioner went to the White House once. Now we find out it's even worse than that. According to the Daily Caller's research, Douglas Schulman visited the White House 157 times during President Obama's administration. The 118 times were in 2010 and 2011 at the height of the activity in which the IRS was blocking Tea Party groups, obstructing them, and interfering with them. He was at the White House 118 times in those 2 years, total 157 times. And you think, well, look, it's IRS. And of course, he's going to have to meet with the White House, go to the White House, talk about IRS stuff. But what's suspicious is that Eric Holder, who, if anybody you think would be meeting with President Obama a whole bunch of times, it would be Eric Holder, the Attorney General. He only went to the White House 62 times. 62 times. IRS guy 2.5 times that many, 157. Here's Secretary of the Treasury Timothy Geithner. This is the guy that Schulman reports to. This is his boss. He only went 48 times. So Schulman, the IRS guy, goes to the White House 4 times more often than his boss, the Secretary of the Treasury. And by the way, IRS is not an independent organization. Don't let the media, that's another way in which the media is trying to cover for Obama here. Well, the IRS, they're an independent organization, not supposed to get involved in the political stuff. Obama didn't have anything to do with that. It is not an independent organization. It's part of the Department of the Treasury. And the head of the Secretary of the Treasury, Timothy Geithner, at the time was nominated by President Obama. So it's a part of the executive branch. It's not independent whatsoever. Hillary Clinton, you'd think she'd be there a lot. She was only in there 43 times. In fact, this is what Vince Coglianese says at Daily Caller. Schulman has more recorded visits to the White House than Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano, Education Secretary Arne Duncan, Energy Secretary Stephen Chu, and former Defense Secretary Robert Gates combined. Now, you'd think Department of Homeland Security, Napolitano would be in there all the time. You'd think Department Health and Human Services, rolling out Obamacare, she'd be in there all the time. But you add up all of their visits, all of them together, and the Schulman was in there more often than they were combined. So that IRS thing is looking worse by the minute. And we also found out today, and then we'll go to the phones, 888-589-8840. We talked about this before briefly, but here's a piece of Washington Free Beacon about the IRS going after 5 pro-Israel groups. So realize now, it's not just Christian groups. It's not just conservative groups. It's not just Tea Party groups. It's not just evangelistic organizations. The wrath of Obama through the IRS now being vented on pro-Israel groups, 5 of them. Washington Free Beacon investigation has identified at least 5 pro-Israel organizations that have been audited by the IRS. Most of the charities openly clashed with the Obama administration's policy of opposing Israeli settlement construction over the so-called Green Line, which was the pre-1967 boundary between Israel and the West Bank and West and East Jerusalem. So these 5, they're 501c4s, and they were accused of being too political on the issue of settlements on the other side of the Green Line. The organization that complained about them was the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, and it turns out that they are a 501c4 themselves. I went and looked it up today, looked at their Form 990 form on the Treasury website. So they're a C4. So apparently, if you're a C4, but you are anti-Israel, you're anti-Semitic, you get a pass. But if you're pro-Israel, pro-Semitic, even though you're a C4, you're going to get accused of being too political, and they're going to land on you like a falling safe. And let's not forget that the Green Line, that was the border in 1967, but Jordan and the other Arab nations invaded Israel in 1967, and they lost that war. They lost that territory, the West Bank, what's now Judea and Samaria. They lost that fair and square to Israel. So Israel took control of that land by winning that war. That's how land changes hands. I mean, that's why the southern states are part of the United States instead of the Confederate States of America. You lose a war, you lose control, sovereign control of that territory. That's how history works. And that's one of the legal ways in which control of land can pass from one political power to another. So President Obama wanted to go back to the pre-1967 as if Jordan and the Arab states had not attacked Israel and if they had not lost. Israel has every right to the West Bank. They've got every right to every piece of turf that they took in that war. Well, let's go to the phones, see what you want to do about the IRS. Let's start with Harold in Oklahoma City. Harold, welcome to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. What do you want to do?
Well, I think they ought to try every single one of them and try bring them in handcuffs before the U.S. Senate and actually have some independent counsels that aren't pro-Obama. And, you know, if they're guilty, then they need to do time. They need to have their pensions stripped. They need to be thrown out on the street like a like a drunken bum. I mean, this is ridiculous. You know, I believe for many, many, many years, and I'm not rich, and I thank goodness I've not been audited, but I've had friends who are in small business that have been audited for no reason over the years, long before Obama got in back during the Clinton administration. And I also here in Oklahoma have read stories about ranchers and farmers that have had their livestock seized, had all their farm equipment seized, and they went after these people like they are multi-million-dollar rascals, and they're not. They're just working Joes, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that the IRS has long, I used to work for the Department of Treasury, so I'm real familiar with the workings of the IRS. They've long had way too much overreaching power in our society, and they're thugs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the bottom line, and I think we ought to go to a basic tax system and clean house and the thought of them hiring however many, I forget the figure for this Obamacare program, it's frightening. I mean, it makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I'm thinking these are the people that are going to monitor our health care.
Yeah, I mean, that's a crazy thing. And I think, Harold, I mean, they want enough money to hire 2,000 agents right away, and the total number of agents they want to hire is 16,000 IRS agents. And I've got a story in the stack here, Harold, about how we're going to be turning over all of this sensitive personal medical information to the IRS. There's a 3-page tax form. That's longer than the 1040 form. A 3-page form that we have to fill out on our own health information that we have to send to the IRS. And so 16,000 agents out there monitoring all of this. It is just kind of a frightening deal. All right, Harold, listen, thank you for the call. I appreciate that. You know, and again, I want to go back to what I said at the beginning. This whole thing is Obamagate, because Obama has to be at the center of this. You look at this, the IRS going after these 5 pro-Israel groups. Where's that coming from? That has to be coming from Obama. He's ticked off that they're opposing his desire to return to the pre-1967 borders. So President Obama is revealing himself to be anti-God, anti-Christian, anti-Semitic, but pro-Muslim. Focal Point, AFR Talk.
We have lost the focus in